Welcome to the Rural Recharge Podcast. I'm your host, Jeb Smith, president of the Florida Farm Bureau Federation. The Rural Recharge is a guided conversation that allows you to cut through the noise and multitude of information out there. You should be able to trust your sources, which is why we're a platform that comes straight from the source of farmers and ranchers that grow what we eat, wear, and use every day. Our guest joining us today is Mr. Matt Pearce, owner of Pearce Cattle Company. Matt is an 8th-generation Floridian and cattle rancher with a diverse operation including sod, beef cattle, hunting, and even photography workshops. He is the past president of Florida Cattlemen's Association and serves on the board of Conservation Florida, working to preserve working lands and wild habitats across Florida. Matt, thank you for joining us today.
Yes, sir. I'm excited.
I am too, because I know you listen to this podcast. So that's even more exciting.
I do.
Well, Matt, tell us a little bit about yourself, 8th generation.
Yes, sir. I'm 8th generation Floridian rancher. My roots run deep. Go back, my family came down through Florida through the Appalachian Trail like a lot of these guys, but mine went further south than a lot of folk. They settled on the northwest shore, Lake Okeechobee, and we've ranched there for about 200 years. One thing that I like to think about in what I do every day is that we ranch in 3 of the most sensitive areas, I think, in Florida. And one being the northwest shore, Lake Okeechobee, the other one being the eastern shore of the Kissimmee River,
right,
and then the northern area of the Everglades down in Clewiston. We run a cow-calf operation based out of Okeechobee. We preg-checked our cows this week, and we were in 3 counties. So, I mean, it's South Florida. It's a big country. I was raised on a 6,000-acre ranch, Glades County, that my family, settled. My family's been here since before the fence laws in the 40s. They ranched in the early 1800s down here, which is pretty neat. I saw a map on Facebook this week that showed, pretty much central to South Florida and the names of folks that, where their vast areas were. Captain John Mazzell Pearce, one of my forefathers, they ranched from the North Shore before there was a dike around the Lake Okeechobee.
Right.
From there, along the western side of the river, up to what would be the Avon Park Bombing Range now, which is big country.
Tell us a little bit about your operation now. Is it a family involved with it still, and is it just you? How does it work?
My dad still kind of runs the Rock Hill Ranch, which is family. Then Pearce Cattle Company, which is my entity, and my 3 kids and my wife, Aubrey, Chandler, and Taylor. Right. They're involved in the day to day. They've all 3 have outside work, jobs, but they're instrumental in the decision-making process that we do. Our operation is about 80% leased land, and then we own about 20% of it. So those challenges day to day are, do you wake up in the morning and somebody calls you and says the 8,000 acres that you're grazing and you've upkept and you've made better than what it was when you got there, are you still going to be able to be there tomorrow?
That's right.
We've expanded into Georgia. We've got cattle in Perry, Georgia. And I can remember taking the kids up there, and we had lost about a 6,000-acre ranch that sold for farming, was going to be a development. They farmed it. And we had to move cattle to Georgia. But before we moved those, I took all 3 of my kids up there. I took the girls on one trip, and I took Chandler on another trip. And I got 2 different perspectives, but they were both in unity to, that was a good decision. Not only to move the cattle up there, but the people that were going to take care of the cows and were, involved in the day to day. I wanted another opinion, which was come from my kids. They're an integral part of the operation and the future and the vision of where we're going with this, where we're expanding and their involvement in it and trying to build that up to pass it to the next generation, like it was to me and to my dad and my great granddad and my forefathers.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about the operation. Is it purebred, commercial run? So
to get more specific about the operation, we run a cow-calf operation. We also develop quite a few heifers to breed. We develop them as yearlings on feed and pasture, and then we artificial inseminate them, and then we'll sell those back into the marketplace. We do quite a bit of that. We buy and sell a lot of cows. So I'll buy a guy's herd that may be phasing out or lost his lease. Could be cows, calves, bulls. We'll take them into the place that we're on here, and we'll house them. This is just a motel for cows is what it is. Hopefully they check in on Monday, and then by Friday there's no vacancy sign, and we heal up and we do the process again the next week.
So,
But
so for folks listening to us, this is a smaller piece that we're sitting on right now. That's just you call it a motel. The cattle are in and out on a smaller portion of the land that you're buying and reselling at that
yes,
point.
sir. Yep. Yes, sir. It's some smaller traps, some 20, 30 acre traps, and then some bigger pastures with some more improved grass on it. But that we have to feed some hay here, and we develop some heifers here that we put on dry feed. Those cows may come in 50 to 200 at a time. I mean, we've had 300 in here. And then so what we do is we sort the pairs out, the cows and the calves, maybe one way. Had just one, for instance, we bought 300 head. Guy was losing the place, and we sorted the baby calves one way. They left 2 days later. We sorted the big calves off, the pairs off. They went one way, and then the cows that were pregnant, we pregnancy tested them, and we sold them another way. So one herd went 3 different ways, but it met the needs of 3 different ranchers. So what we try to do is take something that somebody's, had the misfortune of going out of the business, and then we'll process them, we'll vaccinate them, we'll deworm them, we'll tag them, or we'll do whatever the customer wants, if they want to brand them or whatever. We get a lot of people into the cow business, first time people, we hold their hands, and help them get in. But that's kind of what this is. It is a lot of cattle in, a lot of cattle out. And then, the other places we'll run cow-calf. It's a commercial cow-calf operation. And we'll raise those. We just got done preg checking, like I said, this week, and we'll start the process over. We'll calve October, November, December, and then we'll process those calves in February, March. We'll market them in the spring, but then deliver them and sell them in the summer.
So now we know a little bit more about the operation side of it. You mentioned earlier talking about environmentally sensitive areas. That assume that's probably mostly on leased lands as well. Tell us a little bit how that works and why it's important and why cattle work in those situations.
So to give you for instance, pasture we run down south in Clewiston, it's a WRE, a wetland reserve easement. So all the water that's captured on that property stays on the property. But when I say a WRE easement, there's some ranches that, 20% of it's a WRE, 10% of it's WRE, just the wetlands. 100% of this property is a WRE. So it has a dike all the way around it. And it has to get up to an elevation of, I think, 8 inches of surface before it falls off. There's times where it's 8 inches solid across there. It's some challenges on ranching that way, because you got to calve at a certain time, after the rainy season, which we do. Then you got to market the cattle and move those calves out before the rainy season hits. So we'll ship calves down there earlier than what we do up in Okeechobee to physically get them off the landscape. But with that WRE, it's enabled us to take care of the land in a different way than what we would where we're sitting now, where there's not a restriction on there, where we don't have to hold the water, but we do. We have some practices where we put in riser culverts and hold back water and do some things that we could talk about, a little later. But the WRE is pretty neat because we're holding that water and, putting it on the landscape to where certain things, like maybe in Miami where there's not, floods,
right? Sure.
Or in Palm Beach, because if that water is going to tide, it's going to flood the coastal areas. It's aquifer recharge, and what I mean by that for the folks that don't know is that we're recharging the aquifer for drinking water, where that water's filtering through and hitting the aquifer. That's coming off ranch lands and private property. So it's a big key. There's a lot of other cool things that I could tell you about just that specific place and conservation easements.
I'm curious now too, especially from it, because, if you have a wet spot, do you have to run different types of forage on it for cattle as well to be able to feed them in a wet environment?
That environment down there, you can't go to school to learn that.
No, I bet not.
I say that sarcastically because we've been down there about 6 years. And we do a lot of weather forecasting, but the water comes to the east, so we move our cattle west. It's about a 6 herd rotation down there, wow. And the elevation is a little bit higher to the west. But as far as grasses on the WRE, we can't introduce or plant any new grasses. So it was old farm field. So when I say there's 6 or 8 inches of sheet flow, This is a laser leveled farm field with lateral ditches going across it. So it's, it's like a tabletop.
That's right.
But it's good because when it does dry off, there's a lot of there's a lot of Bermuda grass, there's a lot of Bahia grass, a lot of torpedo grass. So we use what we have. Can't fertilize, you can't do any kind of soil amendments. We just have to manage the land. But in that, we're managing the land to grow back native species, a lot of blue stem to get it back to its natural state.
Absolutely. I can see some Johnson grass maybe out there as well and things like that.
Yep.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about the current state of the cattle industry in America right now.
The state of the cattle industry in America right now, we're all-time low. I mean, we're I think 74-year low. We haven't been this low since 1951. So with that being said, beef production's up. I mean, we're still producing the same amount of beef with less cows.
Right.
But it's caught us, and that's what's made the prices for beef calves or dairy calves what they are today, a record high. We're at record highs with the lowest inventory. To kind of explain that a little better, it's supply and demand. We've got a low supply with high demand. I was listening to a guy give some commentary the other day, and he was talking about, how high ground beef is in the store, a staple I think it's 78% of the market is ground beef. And they think the threshold is $10 a pound until the American consumer pushes back.
Right.
And that's the value in that product and what people see in it and the flavor profile and what and the safety too, that you can eat that. And so there's still some upside potential. Me, myself, I like a stable market. I don't like, a steady climb, but it's good. It's a good market right now. It's kind of where we need to be with inputs, with fertilizer inputs, with chemical inputs, with replacement cost or vehicles, land values.
That's right.
That's kind of where we have to be. And I think, like I said before, the American consumer sees the value in beef, as a safe, nutritious protein source. And it's got a flavor profile that is good. We're going to be a delicacy, the beef. Not that pork and chicken isn't, but it's different. It's got a different flavor profile. And I'll have to tell you that I had chicken twice this week. My wife's a good cook. You just do things with those other value proteins. But beef we've done a good job. I can remember in the 80s and 90s when, it was the heart scare and the beef wasn't as good for you. It was, but people didn't portray it that way. And, now you see the health value of beef. And so that's what the consumer sees is that value, even though it costs more. But the beef business is good. There's still some challenges with it, but the market overall is good. And that higher market relates to like droughts out west. We don't see that because we have an abundance of water.
That's right.
We got dry in the spring, probably the driest that I've seen it in a while, but nothing like those droughts and fires. And so when that happens out west, those folks have to liquidate.
That's right.
The folks in Florida that liquidate, it's because of a land use change. Somebody's building a subdivision where they had cows where it once was an orange grove. That's where we see that shrinking supply, but a continued demand.
Matt, you mentioned challenges. Are there any other challenges that you think might be interesting for folks to hear about as well in the beef industry?
The challenges in the beef industry, the one that comes to mind right off the top of my head is New World screwworms right now. I mean, they say 70 or 80 miles south of Texas, coming up through Mexico. Now, we had screwworm in the Keys in 2016, I think. And I don't think people realized how dangerous that was, not just to the beef supply or to live beef animals, but to your pets, to humans. Any warm-blooded animal is susceptible to screwworm. And I wasn't old enough, and neither were yourself, to remember when my great-granddaddy and my granddaddy and them rode for screwworms and had a doctor. I mean, I couldn't think of it now. I mean, they didn't dehorn and, castration was a problem. But they got through that. They were resilient, and we will be too. But some of the other challenges that I don't think people think about when they eat beef is that just to stay on the land, just to stay on this place and do what we do, the value of the place that we're on now is about 10 times of what we purchased it for.
That's right.
And people are like, oh, well, that's great because you've increased your asset. But But if all you want to do is ranch, that becomes a burden.
Right.
And that's hard to explain to people. And it's hard to live, because I talked about waking up one day and somebody calling and saying, well, your lease is up because we're going to do something else with it. But you have to also weigh into the fact that increase in land prices cause people to go out of business.
That's right.
Because you have to weigh out the economics. And then you get multi-generational families that there's conflict between some of the family members that don't work the ranch. If I had to say anything about what I do on, over my ranching career, it would be the love of the land.
Mm.
And that's what I fear the most, is not being on the landscape. That challenge of high value land, and what are you going to do? And I tell a story in the conservation circles that I feel like myself, and then a lot of other ranchers, but just me in particular, I was born with a sword in my hand.
Mm-hmm.
And people say, well, what is that for? And I'm like, well, every day you have to get up and you have to fight for the nutritious value of beef, which we know it is, but you have to fight the opposition to let them know that. You have to fight the developers that are beating at your door to buy your ranch, to put houses there. You have to fight public perception that, well, beef's too high, or what you're doing along the Kissimmee River is polluting Lake Okeechobee and then, affecting the folks in Miami. And that sword gets wielded every day, because that's part of my job, is to defend our industry and what we do and explain the positive things that we do on the landscape. And that being said, I feel like that sword was handed down. It's almost like it wasn't a choice. I chose to go in the ranching, but that was my heritage,
right.
And it was kind of like your similar situation.
Absolutely.
And my kids have that choice, but they're the same thing. They have that same sword. They were born with that sword. And that gets emotional and sentimental too, because the land, if somebody says, why do you do this? A lot of it's the land. The extra part of it is the revenue that you generate, but knowing that you take a piece of land and make it better than what it has been. And everybody benefits from that. Not everybody sees the benefit, but like we talk about aquifer storage, recharging the aquifer, wildlife habitat, carbon sequestration.
Right.
All the things that the folks on the 20-mile corridor of the coast, they get a benefit of this. I got folks from Audubon and Martin County that come out to the ranch, and they're like, we saw bald eagle. I've never seen a wild quail. We pride ourselves in, hard managing those assets. I call them, they're wildlife, but I mean, aesthetically and emotionally, that's why you do it,
And there are a lot of benefits that the public gets that they may not even recognize. But there's some tools that ranchers and farmers can utilize to be able to conserve what we do possess. Tell us some of those. And I mean, you've actually utilized some on your place as well.
Yes, sir. The other place that we ranch on the eastern shore of the Kissimmee River, it's under a rural and family lands conservation easement. So we still ranch it, but it's protected. And just, one quick note about that is it's in the Sentinel landscape, which is of utmost for national security. And people say, well, how can the conservation easement on a ranch be national security? Well, our neighbors, the Avon Park Bombing Range.
That's right.
And if we're attacked, that's where they're going to train and station, and everybody can feel comfortable knowing that's one of the things. So the thing about the easement there is it's for light pollution. You don't want multi-story buildings being built in that corridor to where all that training's happening. So those are some of the things too that people don't realize about a conservation easement that's benefit, from a national security standpoint. But I think what you were alluding to is like NRCS funding. We've done a lot of cross fencing and rotating cattle, and that plays into the carbon sequestration to where we're storing more carbon in the ground and in the plant than in the air, and that's one of the big factors of cattle is that soil compression. And taking that, upcycling that nutrient from 9 pounds of grass intake to 1 pound of beef production.
Right.
What I tell folks, when I speak at the water management districts, is that, where we ranch along the Kissimmee River, if there were no cows there, that forage would grow up and then go dormant and fall over, and then those nutrients would be put into the waterway. But a cow uptakes the phosphorus from it and turns it into beef. And then that calf is shipped out of the watershed and sent west. So we get an economic stimulus the phosphorus is sent out on a 1% basis on a 500-pound calf. That's 5 pounds of phosphorus per calf.
That's right.
And when you tell that to the water management folks that are thinking science, that relates.
That's right.
And that's all positive. But we've implemented, things like solar water wells where we water our cattle out of a concrete water trough.
Mm-hmm.
Why does that make a difference? Well, then they're not out in the ditches and loafing in those areas. They're getting fresh water. It's helped us immensely down south because that surface water, number one, there's abundance of it, but it's also chemical kind of laden from previous farm fields. It's got some legacy chemicals in it. And then number two is it gets really dry and there's no surface water. So
right.
we can't do any altercation of the land down there. So we've provided fresh water. We alluded to riser culverts.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Your goal is to grow grass, but why would you want to hold water back? So we hold water back for the dry times. We hold water back for wading birds and waterfowl. And those riser culverts, you put the boards in them to hold the water from coming past a certain point. Like I say, we've introduced some new grasses and done a lot of invasive control, a lot of brush management for the NRCS type stuff.
All of those are benefits to the public too.
Yes,
I mean, you've got invasive control, you've got water control, you've got cross fencing, which a lot of folks may not understand what cross fencing is, but it allows you to rotate cattle. So it's not as all in one spot. You're able to divide up the pasture and rotate them. All kinds of different things that are a benefit to society, a benefit to the community. And you mentioned Rural Family Lands Protection Act, which is a huge benefit as it conserves land, keeps it in open green space and carbon sequestration and water aquifer recharge. You've mentioned all those things which are a benefit to society. And that's just right. I mean, all across and accessible to the whole state of Florida as well. So when it comes to, you mentioned you've got some of these challenges in regard to water, et cetera, but you and your business model have vertically integrated. You've expanded into other areas as well. Tell us about some of those and the importance of it, and maybe even might be important to other business ventures for other cattlemen and farmers across the state as well.
Right. So on our wetland reserve easement first, the only thing that you can legally do in the deed is recreate and enjoy it. The grazing of the cattle is a privilege. It's not a right. So there could be a chance to where if somebody's doing something wrong on a WRE, they could be asked to leave.
That's right.
We're lobbying now for that to be a right.
Right.
Florida is the only state, I think, in the union that allows that, and it's for vegetation control. If we took cows off this, it'd be like not mowing your yard for a year, and then you can't see it. At that place, like I said, you can recreate it or you can enjoy it. So cattle alone, whenever we moved in there, cattle alone wouldn't sustain. We couldn't generate enough revenue on just cattle. The first year we saw a lot of ducks, saw a lot of waterfowl. You're on a horse in 8 inches of water, and you look up and there's 15 species of waterfowl, wading birds. I've never seen so many roseate spoonbills. White pelicans, brown pelicans that come inland to feed. Wood storks. So what we ventured into, a good friend of mine, Travis Thompson, who works in the conservation realm and has become a good friend of mine. So we came up with a duck ranching without the G. And that was what we were going to do down south. And we wanted to make it to where, it wasn't a lodge setting. It wasn't anything fancy, but your average guy could come duck hunt. So with that being said, we didn't just throw up a bunch of blinds and just take people's money. What we did was we managed the habitat. So one quick story for those that are interested in doing something like that. I thought, well, we're going to put 20, 30 hunters out there. This was in the beginning. And then so we don't want the cows around because cows are going to mess with the hunters.
Right.
At that point, the cows are secondary and the hunters are priority. So this 500 acre reservoir we were hunting, I say reservoir, it was an impoundment. We put the hunters in there and I'd moved the cows out. And that day there wasn't any ducks.
Oh, no.
And my guide said, man, where'd all the ducks go? And I'm like, well, they're over there with the cows. And so the research that we did, and we were really flexible with our hunters. The research that we did was it's no different than what FWC, Fish and Game Commission, does at TM Goodwin. With their impoundments, they have impoundments that don't have cattle on it. So they go in and roller chop it during the dry season.
Right. Right.
And then they hydrate it, rehydrate it, and then the ducks come. And I'm like, we met with those guys, and I'm like, well, why is that? And they're like, well, when you break the ground, you rehydrate it, you release the crustaceans and the vertebrates, and that's what the waterfowl feed on. And I'm like, well, that's what we're doing with the cows. And he said, exactly.
Yep.
He said, wherever you have your cows is where you want to hunt behind. And I'm like, well, there's a symbiotic relationship with cows and raising beef, and then recreation and hunting. And so what we do was would have a common area, and it's kind of a do-it-yourself kind of hunt. You kind of build your blind with cabbage fans, and if you want to bring a dog, you can. We'll put you out, and it's just fun. But we're like, when it's pitch black dark at 4:00 in the morning, and we're getting ready doing our safety briefing, we talk about, this is a working cattle ranch. The reason you're here is because we've accepted the liability of a bunch of guns on the property, but in return, we want you to see that it's a working cattle ranch, and go share the message, the positivity of what your experience is. And so then you put those guys out, and I've had the fortune of going and picking them back up. And the first thing they say was, "Man, this is a real cattle ranch."
That's right.
And I'm like, "Yes, sir." And they said, "We had a cow and a calf walk right by our blind today, or we saw some deer come through here, a hog." And they appreciate that. And so these guys are paying us to come for the experience, and that's what it is, an experience. And at the end of the day, they're saying thanks.
Mm.
And so that's our message is, this is what we're doing to protect the environment. And there's a lot of these discussions afterwards around the fire and a sausage and a cold drink. And we're trying to protect the habitat and create, that for ducks. We plant a lot of millet. We tried to plant some rice, but I'll be the first one to tell you, I'm not a farmer. And so, but the ducks respond to that. They respond to the millet. We just take during the dry season, before it starts raining, we'll plant millet, and then we'll rehydrate it. And then, they come to that natural feed. But, that's been a big revenue source for us. It's been a big story as well, because out of this duck hunting and recreation part of it, we do a lot of scouting, and we're not afraid to turn people away if the ducks aren't there. I mean, they're a migratory bird. So one of the things also, get into the wildlife part of it, is I think it was 2 years ago. We had an impoundment that had a bunch of willows in it, and some Brazilian pepper as well.
Mm.
And I rode in there one day, and I saw a bunch of snail kites. Now, I used to not be a bird guy, but I'm a bird guy now. I can identify my fair share, and I've learned from those guys, because it's important, to know what you have on your landscape, because what you have is a direct reflection of how you're taking care of the land.
That's right. Sure.
And so I called Travis, and I said, "Hey, there's like 40 or 50 snail kites here on the ranch." I said, "I've done my research, and there's only 3,000 Everglades snail kites in the world.
Mm.
They're an endangered species. They stay on Lake Okeechobee, Lake Apopka, Lake Togo, some other WREs." I said, "But there's about 60 that I can count here. I've counted them with my cow counter, And he goes, "Well, what do we want to do?" And I'm like, "We got to tell somebody." And he said, "Okay." He said, "I'll call my guys at FWC." And I had reached out to some other folks, and they're like, "No, there's no way." And I'm like, "Okay, I'll go reach out to somebody else." But that being said, the way I was raised, you didn't tell anybody that.
Mm.
And, that's the part that you get emotional about as well, because what happened on your ranch stayed on your ranch.
Right.
It's kind of like Vegas,
Yeah.
but not as glamorous. But the reason that is because if you had a federal endangered species on your place and the government found out, what are they going to do? They're going to impede you from your production.
Right.
So the way I was raised is you didn't tell anybody that. You didn't broadcast that. You didn't bring anybody on, because they were going to restrict you from doing what your livelihood is, which is just making a living. And so I'm like, we got to tell somebody this. This is a big deal. And so we told FWC, and they got involved. We told University of Florida. They have a whole snail kite team. We had some other folks from Audubon get involved. Well, so we went down for about 2 months, and we documented everything. And those 60 turned into, I think it was 160.
No way. Wow.
But we had 60 nests on the ranch that we documented. There was more nests than that. So why is this a big deal? we would get a printout every week of where the nests were in the whole state. And where they should have been on Lake Okeechobee and Moonshine Bay, or where they should have been in Lake Apopka. They weren't. The water levels were too high.
Right.
So they weren't going to nest there. So we got man-made problems with the lake levels that are impeding environmental species. But you got a private ranch owner out here providing habitat. But there's that fear of getting shut down. They're not going to shut Lake Okeechobee down because the birds are there, but they could shut you down. So we fostered a relationship with governmental agencies. We haven't been fearful, and not everybody thinks this way. I get it, because there is some fear. But that documentation, where you take somebody from Audubon, Martin County, and you say, hey, this is what's happening on a ranch. And they go back to one of the most conservative environmental counties in the state.
That's right.
And they tell their friends, we're their friends now. But that wasn't always the message. Or you take your daughter to band one of the first fledglings, that they banned with my brand, a P1, and that's pretty neat. I mean, you put all that on all the cows you want, but until you put that on an endangered species, it's a different feeling. And so we did that where we documented the nest, and then you'd go back and you'd count the eggs. The anxiousness, the buildup, the climax, was when that first one got banded, and then 2 weeks later they fly off. Yeah. And we've been on some national meetings and gave our presentation. It's pretty cool because, that's not my job. I'm a rancher, right. But this is something that you foster and you do that. And they're on other WREs. There's other private land people that, the place down south, we've got panthers, we've got bears, we've got pythons. We're caring for all of God's creatures.
Amen. Matt, it's interesting because we started off today. You're an 8th generation Floridian rancher, and we talked about change. We talked about change. The lake's changed. It's bermed. It's up. We've talked about change in regard to the cattle industry, things that have changed. Worked through New World screwworm in the 60s and how that was handled, and then things have changed. Talk about the model from trying to make a living and how that has changed, going from just merely cattle ranching and being very protective of it to now being open to even the propagation and promotion of endangered species and duck ranching as well, and all this vertical integration and change. You have to be willing to change as a rancher, as a farmer in Florida, to survive. And you've done that. What would be your advice to others that may be facing some challenges? How can they change to be able to be successful?
We're in the height of the market right now, and you can't lose sight of where we're at or where we've been, because the way I look at this is it's a mountain, and you're climbing the mountain, and until you get to the top, the apex, you're always in a struggle. And even when you get there and you're coming down, you're going to the valley, there's still rocks and crevices, and you're struggling on the way down too. But you got to remember how you got there, and probably right now, a guy can make it just on cattle. The market's right. I mean, 5 years ago when we started in the expansion, you couldn't make it on cattle. I mean, I tell my lessees, guys I'm leasing from, we can't just make it on cattle. We have to be doing this, and this. We do some equipment work to maintain some other things for NRCS contracts. The place that we have here, I mean, we've done some photography workshops, where you get 8 or 10 people that come out, and what do they want to see? They want to see the 8 or 10 longhorns that are out there and amongst those black bred heifers that are, some of the nicest things you'd ever see. But they want to see, waterfowl. They want to see that. It's no different than the guys that are hunting ducks. They want to come. I mean, we've had collectors come and they just want to shoot one duck. They're coming from all over. Some of the other things we do right now, the Bahia sod business is huge. I could make a statement that, some of my forefathers would roll over in their grave because they hated sod. And I get it. I mean, it's a necessary evil, but if you're in a good sod rotation, it's very revenue driven, and then you plant it back, and then you've got better forage than what you had. Everybody looks at the negative part of it, but that's one thing that, I heard Ralph Pelez say that at the Beef Cattle Short Course this year. He said people should be keeping less cattle and cutting a little bit more sod and then planting it in, more improved grasses like Gib Tuck or Floralta or Hermothria to where they got to feed less. And that makes sense. You just got to get creative. I mean, whether you've got 100 acres or 100,000, you can entertain folks on it. There's things that you can do. We do a lot with entertaining, political people trying to get, show, the Speaker of the House, hey, here's what a ranch is, or show somebody that, man, they love to turkey hunt, but they don't know anything about a ranch, you know? And so we do some of that too. I mean, the hunting deal has been pretty good, but it's just whatever you can get done on your land. We're pushing for payment for environmental services now, and that's, I mean, all the things that you're getting benefit of it, it comes at a cost, because you're sacrificing somewhere else. But that's going to be a big deal for some ranchers too. They've got a pilot project on the panthers where they're paying for habitat. So we're trying to look into some gopher tortoise relocation sites. That's, other than conservation easements, that's a big deal.
Sure.
And we've still got some land that we'll put in the easements.
Well, I know this, Matt. I know one of the things is you're open to a lot of different things that can benefit ultimately the bottom line, so that you can maintain a livelihood, and that for other generations. Obviously, the 9th generation is here. The 9th generation is engaged, and the 10th is on its way. Yes. And here it'll be just here, all coming back. But one thing you possess, and people, I think they sense it just listening to you. You're extremely hospitable. You are open to people. You love people. You love this land, and you want to do what's best for the state of Florida and your family, and that's part of it. And I know that even with the hunting side of it and the photography side of it and the cattle side of it, it's all because of your personality. And I can tell you, it is a joy to know you, and it is a blessing to be able to call you a friend and to be also a benefactor of some of that hospitality. And I just encourage folks that if they've never met you and have a desire to be on your place, you're just open and be willing to do that, and to host them, to be a benefit, continuing a benefit for folks to see what's going on here in Okeechobee and all these counties, 3 counties that you're running cattle in.
Yeah, we try not to turn people away.
No, I'm sure.
Even our biggest critics, and I could tell you stories on stories when I was Cattleman's president of that. We invited our adversaries into our camp. And my good friend Jim Hanley says, "Well, if you don't want to get bit by a snake, you got to know where he's at."
That's right.
And my goal and so the way I was raised is, we were on the ranch, and not everybody could go to the meetings. So part of the family went to the meetings, and part of them stayed home and worked. And so that's kind of the way I view things, is that none of the things that I do are self-serving in my leadership roles, because of that mentality of that not every member of the family can go to the luxurious meetings. That's what, the mentality is. But somebody's got to go, and then somebody's got to represent, just like yourself, the folks that have to stay at home and work. And I realize that, but it's my obligation to tell our story, all of ag, whether it's in Tallahassee, Washington, D.C., or speaking for the Rotary Club. It's just something that, I feel like that has to be done. Not everybody's going to do it. So you have to try harder to get that message out.
Well, there's no doubt that you're a servant of servants, and a very sacrificial in giving of it, to giving of your time, of your person, of your property, and it's very, very much appreciated. Matt, if there was one thing you wanted to leave with the listening audience, what would that be?
That's the one thing I didn't think about. One thing I'd like to leave the audience with is that, from an agriculture standpoint or a ranching standpoint specifically, is that these places are going by fast. And nobody thinks about it because they can go to their park, but they can't go see what I saw yesterday on the shore of the Yosemite River, and that's 2 bald eagles and a dead oak tree. Sure. Or we can walk outside here and see a covey of 18 quail, or I could take you to my house and see the same quail, or we could go see a snail kite, or those things in nature people take for granted that they see them on TV or in a book, but that's what we live every day.
Amen.
And we're an open door. I mean, what I tell people is that, embrace, the environmental part of ranching and keep eating beef. And, it's just, it's a good story. It's a good feeling.
Well, Matt Pearce, thank you for your time today. You've been a blessing to be able to listen to and glean some things off of. Wish you the very best, and thank you for your friendship.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you so much for supporting the Rural Recharge podcast. We hope that you are enjoying these conversations brought to you by farmers for your benefit. While you're here, please consider giving us a rating or a review. It really does help us to continue to share the stories of our Florida farm families and the important impact they have on your community. Thank you, and have a great day.